What if I told you that one of the most dangerous terrorists in the Middle East was killed by his own son without the son ever knowing he did it? And no, this isn't some made-up movie plot. This actually happened. And the way Mossad pulled it off is so twisted, so calculated, and so cold that when you hear the full story, you're going to have a hard time believing real people actually planned this. Because here's the thing, Mossad didn't just want this man dead. They wanted to send a message. And that message was, we can get to you through anyone, even your own blood. So let me take you through the entire operation from start to finish. How they found him, how they tracked him for years, how they studied every single person he loved, and how they used the one person he trusted most in this world to hand him his own death without ever pulling a trigger. If you think you know how intelligence agencies work, this story is about to change everything you thought you knew. Alright, so to really understand how insane this whole thing is, we need to go back to the beginning. We need to talk about who this man was and why Mossad spent years trying to figure out how to kill him in a way that would be completely untraceable. His name was Mahmoud, and in the world of Middle Eastern terrorism, Mahmoud wasn't just another fighter. He was an engineer, and not the kind that builds bridges or designs buildings. This guy built bombs, really, really effective bombs. The kind that could be hidden in anything, a phone, a toy, a book. He was creative in the most terrifying way possible. Now, Mossad had been watching Mahmoud for almost a decade. They knew where he slept. They knew what he ate for breakfast. They knew the names of his children and the route his wife took to the market every Thursday morning. But here's the problem. Mahmoud was paranoid. And when I say paranoid, I mean the guy changed locations every single night. He never slept in the same place twice. He never used the same phone for more than a few days. He had people taste his food before he ate it. He trusted almost no one. And that last part is important, almost no one, because there was one person in this world that Mahmoud trusted completely. One person he would never suspect. One person who had access to him at all times without raising any suspicion. His son, his 18-year-old son, Karim. Now, before we go any further, I want to make something very clear. Karim had no idea what was happening. He wasn't working with Mossad. He wasn't a spy. He wasn't a traitor. He was just a kid who loved his father. And that's exactly what made him the perfect weapon. So how did Mossad even come up with this plan? Well, to understand that, you need to understand how Mossad thinks. And they don't think like normal people. They don't think like military generals or police officers or even other spy agencies. Mossad thinks in terms of human psychology. They study people. They study relationships. They study trust. And one of their core principles is this. The best way to get to someone is through someone they love. Think about that for a second. If you wanted to protect yourself from your enemies, you'd probably focus on security guards, locked doors, surveillance cameras, stuff like that. But what if your enemy decided to come at you through your mother, through your best friend, through your child? You'd never see it coming. And that's exactly what Mossad counted on. See, they had been trying to kill Mahmoud for years using traditional methods. They tried car bombs. He switched cars randomly. They tried snipers. He never stuck to a schedule. They tried poison. He had food tasters. Every single method failed because this guy had thought of everything, but he hadn't thought of Karim. Let me tell you about Karim for a minute because understanding him is key to understanding how this whole operation worked. Karim was born in 1977 in a small village that most people have never heard of. His father, Mahmoud, was already involved in what he called the resistance by the time Karim was born. So Karim grew up in a world where his father was always gone, always hiding, always being hunted. But despite all of that, Karim loved his father. He idolized him. To Karim, his father wasn't a terrorist. He was a hero, a freedom fighter, someone who was standing up against oppression, and Mahmoud loved his son back. In fact, most people who knew Mahmoud said that Karim was the only person in the world who could make him smile. When Karim turned 16, he started helping his father with small tasks. Nothing dangerous, just running messages between different locations, picking up packages, delivering letters. Normal stuff that any teenager could do without raising suspicion. And Mossad noticed this immediately. They saw that Karim had access. He could walk into any location his father used without being stopped. He could carry things past security. He could get close. So they started watching Karim just as closely as they watched Mahmoud. They followed him to school. They followed him to the market. They watched who his friends were and what girls he talked to. They built an entire profile on this kid, and then they found their opening. Karim had a friend named Yusuf, and Yusuf wasn't actually Yusuf. His real name was David, and he was a Mossad agent who had been placed in Karim's school 2 years earlier for this exact purpose. Now, when I say David was undercover, I mean deep undercover. This guy had spent 18 months learning Arabic until he could speak it without any accent. He had studied the local culture, the local customs, the local slang. He had created an entire fake identity complete with a fake family history, fake school records, and fake social media profiles. By the time David met Karim, he was completely indistinguishable from any other kid in that town. The friendship started slowly. David didn't push it. He just made himself available. He sat near Karim in class. He showed up at the same places Karim went after school. He made small talk. He offered to share his lunch one day when Karim forgot his. And over time, Karim started to trust him. This is classic Mossad technique, by the way. They call it the long game. Most intelligence agencies want quick results. They want to get in, get the information, and get out. But Mossad is different. They're willing to wait years for the right moment. They're willing to invest massive amounts of time and resources into building a relationship that might not pay off for a decade. And in Karim's case, that patience was about to pay off in a way that would change everything. So here's where things start to get really interesting. By the time Karim was 18, he and David had been friends for almost 2 years. They hung out after school, they played soccer together, they talked about girls and music, and all the normal stuff teenagers talk about. But David was also slowly, carefully gathering intelligence. See, whenever Karim talked about his father, David would listen. He wouldn't ask too many questions. He wouldn't push. He would just listen and remember. And then he would pass everything along to his handlers back in Israel. Through these conversations, Mossad learned things about Mahmoud that they could never have discovered through surveillance alone. They learned that Mahmoud had a weakness for a certain type of sweet pastry that his wife made. They learned that he had a bad knee from an old injury and walked with a slight limp when the weather was cold. They learned that he was developing hearing problems in his left ear. But most importantly, they learned about Mahmoud's habits when he was around his son. And this is crucial. See, when Mahmoud was in public, he was extremely careful. He never let his guard down. He was always watching, always suspicious, always ready for an attack. But when he was with Karim, he relaxed. He let his guard down. He felt safe. And that's when Mossad knew exactly how they were going to do this. The plan they came up with was elegant in its simplicity and absolutely brutal in its execution. Here's what they did. They knew that Karim's birthday was coming up in a few months. They also knew that Mahmoud always tried to be there for his son's birthday no matter what. It was one of the few days of the year where Mahmoud would stay in one location for more than a few hours. So David, acting as Karim's friend, mentioned that he had an uncle who could get electronics at a really good price, phones, watches, that kind of stuff. He offered to hook Karim up with a nice gift that Karim could give to his father for the holidays. Karim thought this was great. His father was always complaining about his old phone, and getting him a new one would be the perfect gift. So David arranged the whole thing. He took Karim to meet his quote-unquote uncle, who was actually another Mossad agent. The agent sold Karim a brand new mobile phone at a heavily discounted price. It was a nice phone too, top of the line for that time. But here's the thing. That phone had been modified. Inside the phone, hidden in a way that was completely undetectable, was a small amount of plastic explosive. Not enough to destroy a building, just enough to kill whoever was holding it next to their head. And there was a detonator, a tiny electronic trigger that could be activated remotely from thousands of miles away. Karim had no idea. He just thought he was buying his father a nice birthday present. Now you might be thinking, okay, but how did Mossad know that Mahmoud would actually use the phone? What if he was too paranoid? What if he had his people check it first? And this is where the genius of the plan really shows. Mossad knew that Mahmoud didn't trust anyone, but they also knew that he trusted his son completely. So they counted on one simple thing. Mahmoud would never suspect that a gift from Karim could be dangerous. And they were right. When Karim gave his father the phone, Mahmoud was touched. He hugged his son. He thanked him. And then he started using the phone immediately. No security checks, no suspicion, nothing, because it came from Karim. For the next few weeks, Mossad monitored Mahmoud's phone usage. They could track exactly where he was whenever he turned the phone on. They could listen to his conversations. They could read his text messages. But they waited. They wanted to make sure they got him at the perfect moment. A moment when he was alone. A moment when there would be no witnesses. A moment when they could deny any involvement. That moment came on a quiet Tuesday morning. Mahmoud was in a small apartment on the outskirts of a city I won't name. He was alone. His security team was outside. He had just finished breakfast and was about to make a phone call. Thousands of miles away, in a secure facility in Israel, a Mossad technician was watching a screen that showed Mahmoud's exact location. The technician had his finger on a button. Mahmoud raised the phone to his ear. The technician pressed the button, and just like that, it was over. The explosion was small. From outside, it barely sounded louder than a car backfiring, but inside that apartment, it was devastating. Mahmoud was killed instantly. When his security team rushed in, they found him on the floor. At first, they thought it was a heart attack or a stroke. The explosion was so precise, so targeted, that it left almost no visible damage to the room. It took hours for anyone to figure out what had actually happened, and even then, they couldn't understand it. The phone was destroyed, obviously, but the investigators couldn't determine how anyone could have gotten close enough to plant a bomb, because no one had gotten close. The bomb had walked right through the front door in the hands of Mahmoud's own son. Now here's the part of the story that really messes with your head. Karim didn't find out what happened until later that day. He was at school when he got the news that his father was dead. He rushed home. He was devastated. His father, his hero, was gone. And for a long time, Karim didn't know how his father had died. The details were kept quiet. Different people said different things. Some said it was an airstrike. Some said it was a rival group. Some said it was natural causes. But Karim knew something was wrong. He could feel it. His father was too careful to die in some random attack. Someone had gotten to him. But how? It wasn't until years later that the truth started to come out. And when it did, it destroyed Karim. See, what Mossad hadn't counted on was that Karim would eventually figure it out. They assumed he would just accept whatever story he was told and move on with his life. But Karim was his father's son. He was smart. He was suspicious. And he kept digging. He started by retracing his father's final days. He talked to everyone who had seen Mahmoud before his death. He examined every piece of evidence he could find, and eventually he remembered the phone. He remembered that his father had been using a new phone right before he died, a phone that Karim himself had given him, a phone that he had bought from his friend Yusuf's uncle. He tried to find Yusuf to ask him about it, but Yusuf had disappeared. His family had moved away months ago. No one knew where they went. It was like they had never existed. And that's when Karim knew. He knew that Yusuf wasn't really Yusuf. He knew that the uncle wasn't really an uncle. And he knew that he, Karim, had killed his own father. I want to stop here for a second and just acknowledge how absolutely devastating this is. Imagine being Karim. Imagine spending your whole life loving your father, idolizing him, wanting to be like him, and then finding out that you were the one who delivered the weapon that killed him. You didn't pull the trigger. You didn't press the button, but you handed him the bomb. You put it in his hands. You made it possible. And you did it all because you trusted the wrong person. This is what makes Mossad so terrifying. They don't just kill their targets. They destroy the people around them. They weaponize love. They weaponize trust. They take the most beautiful parts of human relationships and turn them into tools of death. And they do it without leaving any fingerprints. Now let's talk about the aftermath of this operation, because the effects went far beyond just Mahmoud's death. First, there was the immediate impact on Mahmoud's organization. Without their chief bomb maker, they were significantly weakened. Other engineers tried to step up, but none of them had Mahmoud's skill. The quality of their devices decreased. Their operations became less effective. But more importantly, there was a massive psychological impact on everyone in that world. See, when word got out about how Mahmoud was killed, it sent shockwaves through the entire community. People started questioning everyone around them. If Mossad could turn a man's own son into an unwitting assassin, who else could they get to? Trust broke down completely. Fighters started suspecting their own family members. Organizations became paranoid to the point of paralysis. Some groups even started executing their own people based on nothing more than rumors and suspicion. This is actually a documented Mossad strategy. They don't just want to kill high-value targets. They want to create fear. They want their enemies to be so paranoid, so suspicious, so divided that they can't function effectively. And in this case, it worked perfectly. Let me give you some more context about why this operation was so important in the bigger picture. Mahmoud wasn't just any bomb maker. He was responsible for dozens of attacks that had killed hundreds of people. He had developed new techniques that other groups copied. He had trained a whole generation of engineers who were now scattered across the region. For years, Israeli intelligence had considered him one of their top priorities. Multiple units had tried multiple times to take him out, but he was just too careful, too smart, too protected. The fact that Mossad finally got him wasn't just a tactical victory, it was a statement. It showed that no matter how careful you are, no matter how many precautions you take, they will find a way. And they did it in a way that was completely deniable. There was no raid, no airstrike, no special forces team, just a phone that exploded in a private apartment. To this day, Israel has never officially confirmed its involvement in Mahmoud's death. They don't have to. Everyone knows. And that's exactly the point. Now, I want to spend some time talking about the technical side of this operation, because it's actually really fascinating from an intelligence standpoint. The phone that was used to kill Mahmoud was a masterpiece of engineering. The explosive inside was a type of plastic compound that is virtually undetectable. It doesn't show up on normal security scans. It doesn't have a distinct smell. It looks and feels like regular plastic. The detonator was equally impressive. It was designed to look exactly like a normal phone component. Even if someone had taken the phone apart and examined it, they probably wouldn't have noticed anything unusual. And the remote trigger was even more sophisticated. It used a specific radio frequency that was encrypted and bounced through multiple satellites. The signal couldn't be traced. It couldn't be jammed. It was virtually foolproof. This kind of technology doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It takes years of research and development. It takes the resources of an entire nation, and it takes a level of technical expertise that very few organizations in the world possess. Mossad has all of that, but the technology was only part of it. The real genius of this operation was the human element. Think about how much work went into cultivating David's friendship with Karim. 2 years of daily effort, 2 years of building trust, 2 years of living a lie so convincingly that even Karim's family accepted David as one of their own. This is what separates Mossad from most other intelligence agencies. They understand that technology alone isn't enough. Satellites can tell you where someone is. Drones can watch what they do. But only human intelligence can tell you who they trust, who they love, who they would never suspect. And that's the information that really matters. There's another aspect of this story that I think is worth exploring, and that's the question of ethics. Was what Mossad did justified? They killed a man who had killed many others, but they also manipulated an innocent kid into becoming an unwitting accomplice to his own father's murder. Some people would say this was necessary. Mahmoud was a dangerous man who needed to be stopped. Traditional methods had failed. This was the only way. Others would say this crossed a line, that using a child, even an adult child, as a weapon is never acceptable, that the psychological damage done to Karim was itself a form of violence. I'm not going to tell you what to think, but I think it's important to sit with these questions, because this is what intelligence work really looks like. It's not glamorous, it's not clean, it's messy and complicated and full of moral gray areas. And the people who do this work have to live with those choices for the rest of their lives. Let's talk about what happened to Karim after he figured out the truth. By all accounts, he was never the same. The knowledge that he had been used, that his friendship with David was fake, that he had handed his father the weapon that killed him, it broke something inside him. He became withdrawn. He stopped trusting people. He cut ties with almost everyone he knew. For years, he lived in isolation, unable to form new relationships because he was terrified that anyone could be another David. Some reports say he eventually moved to a different country. Others say he never left. The details are murky because Karim went out of his way to disappear from public life. But whatever happened to him physically, we know what happened to him emotionally. He was a casualty of this operation just as much as his father was, just in a different way. Now, I want to talk about some of the broader implications of this story, because what happened to Mahmoud wasn't an isolated incident. It's part of a larger pattern that tells us a lot about how modern intelligence agencies operate. Over the past few decades, Mossad has perfected what some people call targeted killing. The idea is simple. Instead of waging large-scale military operations that cause massive collateral damage, You identify specific high-value individuals and eliminate them with surgical precision. This sounds clean in theory, but as we've seen, the reality is much more complicated. Because to get that precision, you often have to manipulate innocent people. You have to build fake relationships. You have to turn love and trust into weapons. And the psychological damage from that extends far beyond the immediate target. There's a concept in intelligence work called blowback. It refers to the unintended consequences of covert operations, and the killing of Mahmoud is a perfect example. Yes, Mossad took out a major threat, but they also created a story that would be told and retold for generations. A story about how Israel was willing to use a son to kill his own father. A story that would fuel hatred and radicalization for decades to come. Did the death of Mahmoud save lives in the short term? Probably. Did the method used to kill him create more enemies in the long term? Almost certainly. This is the paradox of counter-terrorism. Every action has consequences, and sometimes the cure can be worse than the disease. Let me share some other examples of similar operations that give context to what happened here. In 1996, a man known as the Engineer was killed when a cell phone exploded next to his head. Sound familiar? The Engineer was also a bomb maker, also extremely careful, also taken out through a device given to him by someone he trusted. In 2010, a senior official was assassinated in a hotel in Dubai. The operation involved more than 24 Mossad agents using fake passports and elaborate disguises. They tracked their target for weeks before finally getting close enough to inject him with a substance that caused a heart attack. In 2020, a top nuclear scientist was killed in Iran using a remote-controlled machine gun that was assembled in a truck near his vehicle. The gun fired multiple rounds and then self-destructed to eliminate evidence. Each of these operations shares certain characteristics: meticulous planning, long-term intelligence gathering, exploitation of the target's routines and relationships, and the use of sophisticated technology to minimize risk to the operators. This is what modern assassination looks like. It's not the stuff of spy movies with car chases and gunfights. It's patient, methodical, and absolutely ruthless. Now, you might be wondering how we even know all these details about an operation that Israel has never officially acknowledged. The answer is complicated. Some information comes from investigative journalists who have spent years piecing together evidence. Some comes from former intelligence officers who have written books or given interviews after their retirement. Some comes from foreign intelligence agencies who have their own sources. And some of it, frankly, is educated guesswork based on known Mossad tactics and the evidence that was left behind. This is why I've been careful throughout this video to present this as a story rather than a documented fact. The broad outlines are well established, but some of the specific details may never be confirmed. That's just the nature of intelligence work. These agencies operate in the shadows. They don't hold press conferences. They don't release official statements. They just do their work and let the results speak for themselves. Let's circle back to the main theme of this video, the idea that Mossad used a terrorist's own son to deliver his death. What makes this so compelling isn't just the operational cleverness, it's the psychological horror of it. The idea that your own child, the person you love most in the world, could be turned into an instrument of your destruction without ever knowing it. This is psychological warfare at its most refined. It's not enough to kill your enemies. You have to make them question everything. You have to make them afraid to trust anyone. You have to make them feel like there's no safe place, no safe person, nowhere to hide. And Mossad has mastered this art form in a way that no other intelligence agency in the world has matched. I want to spend a few minutes talking about the people who actually carry out these operations. The agents in the field, the technicians in the labs, the analysts who spend years building target profiles. These are some of the most skilled professionals in the world. The selection process for Mossad is incredibly rigorous. Candidates go through months of psychological testing, physical training, and skill assessments. Only a tiny fraction make it through. And once you're in, the training is even more intense. You learn languages. You learn how to build and maintain cover identities. You learn surveillance and counter-surveillance techniques. You learn how to kill in a dozen different ways. But perhaps most importantly, you learn how to think like your enemy. You study their culture, their religion, their history, their psychology, you become an expert in everything about them. This is why Mossad is so effective. They don't just throw resources at a problem. They approach each target as a unique puzzle that requires a unique solution. The operation against Mahmoud is a perfect example of this approach. When traditional assassination methods failed, Mossad didn't just try harder, they stepped back and asked themselves a different question. Not how can we get to him, but who can get to him? And the answer was his son. From there, everything else flowed naturally. They identified David as the right agent for the job. They placed him in Karim's school. They gave him 2 years to build a friendship. They found the right moment to introduce the phone, and they waited for the perfect opportunity to strike. Every single step was calculated. Every single variable was accounted for. And in the end, it worked exactly as planned. This is what operational excellence looks like. It's not glamorous. It's not exciting. It's just relentless, patient, methodical work over months and years until you finally achieve your objective. Now let's talk about the legacy of this operation. In the intelligence community, the killing of Mahmoud is studied as a textbook example of how to eliminate a hard target. It demonstrated that no one is untouchable if you're willing to be creative and patient enough. But it also raised important questions about where to draw the line. The manipulation of Karim was effective, but was it worth the cost? The psychological damage to an innocent young man? The precedent it set for future operations? These are questions that intelligence agencies grapple with constantly, and there are no easy answers. What's clear is that operations like this have become more common in recent years. As traditional military actions have become more difficult and more scrutinized, covert assassinations have become an increasingly attractive alternative, and Mossad has been at the forefront of this trend. I want to close out the main part of this video by bringing things back to the human element. It's easy to talk about intelligence operations in abstract terms, to discuss tactics and strategies and technological capabilities. But at the end of the day, these are stories about real people. Mahmoud was a real person. Yes, he did terrible things, but he was also a father who loved his son, a husband, a member of a community. His death left a hole in the lives of people who cared about him. Karim was a real person, an innocent kid who got caught up in something he didn't understand. His life was destroyed not by anything he did, but by who his father was. Even David was a real person, an agent who spent 2 years of his life pretending to be someone he wasn't, building a friendship he knew was fake, manipulating a kid who trusted him completely. When we tell these stories, we need to remember that. We need to remember that behind the headlines and the operational details, there are human beings with human emotions and human consequences. So what can we learn from all of this? First, that intelligence work is far more complex than most people realize. It's not just about satellites and drones and high-tech gadgets. It's about understanding people, understanding relationships, understanding trust. Second, that there are no clean victories in this world. Every success comes with a cost. Every operation has consequences that ripple outward in ways that are impossible to predict. And third, that the line between hero and villain is often thinner than we'd like to believe. The same skills that are used to protect one group of people can be used to devastate another. It all depends on perspective. These are uncomfortable truths, but they're important ones, because if we don't grapple with them, we can't really understand the world we live in. Before I wrap up, I want to give you some additional context that I think is important. Mossad is often portrayed in media as an almost superhuman organization, capable of anything, unstoppable, infallible. But the reality is more nuanced. Mossad has had its share of failures too. Operations that went wrong, agents who were caught, targets who escaped. In 1997, they botched an assassination attempt in Jordan that nearly caused a diplomatic crisis. In 2010, the Dubai operation I mentioned earlier was captured on hotel surveillance cameras, exposing the identities of multiple agents. In 2018, one of their operations in Tehran was apparently discovered before it could be completed. I mention this not to diminish Mossad's capabilities, but to provide balance. They are extremely good at what they do, but they're not perfect. And understanding both their successes and their failures gives us a more complete picture of how intelligence work actually functions. There's also a broader geopolitical context that's worth mentioning. Israel exists in one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in the world. It's surrounded by countries and organizations that have sworn to destroy it. its very existence is under constant threat. This context doesn't justify everything Israel does, but it does help explain why Mossad operates the way it does. When you feel like your survival is at stake, you're willing to do things that might seem extreme from the outside. This is true of every country that faces existential threats, and it's important to keep in mind when we evaluate the actions of intelligence agencies. Now, I know some of you are probably wondering how accurate this story is, and that's a fair question. As I mentioned earlier, many details of intelligence operations remain classified forever. What I've shared with you today is based on the best available information from credible sources, but I can't guarantee that every detail is 100% accurate. What I can tell you is that the broad outlines of this story are well documented. Mossad did target Mahmoud. He was killed by an explosive device, and the device was delivered through someone in his inner circle. The specific details about Karim and David may be partially reconstructed based on known Mossad tactics and investigative reporting, but they're consistent with how Mossad has operated in similar cases. In the world of intelligence, absolute certainty is rare. We work with the best information we have and accept that some mysteries may never be solved. As we come to the end of this video, I want to leave you with a final thought. The story of Mahmoud and Karim is ultimately a tragedy. A father killed by his own son without the son ever knowing it. A young man's life destroyed by forces he couldn't see and couldn't control. And in the end, what was accomplished? Mahmoud is dead, but the conflict continues. New bomb makers have emerged. New attacks have been carried out. The cycle of violence goes on. This isn't meant to be a cynical conclusion. It's just reality. Intelligence operations can achieve tactical victories. They can take out specific threats, but they can't solve the underlying problems that create those threats in the first place. That requires something else entirely: diplomacy, economic development, education, addressing root causes instead of just symptoms. Maybe someday we'll get there. Maybe someday stories like this will be historical curiosities instead of current events. But for now, this is the world we live in. A world where fathers can be killed by gifts from their sons. A world where trust can be weaponized. A world where the most dangerous thing isn't the enemy you can see, but the friend you thought you knew. If you found this video interesting and you want to learn more about intelligence operations, the psychology of espionage, and the hidden wars that shape our world, subscribe to the channel, because I've got a lot more stories like this one coming.